When I started Bleach, I didn't plan on making videos or sharing my thoughts about it. I only felt I needed to when I was completely and utterly moved by the Memories in the Rain chapters, and I had to get it out of my head somewhere. Because of this, I never did a deep dive on those early chapters and only really shared my thoughts on the tail end of the Substitute arc. And while I obviously can't go back and react to those chapters for the first time, I thought it would be fun to look back and share some highlights for me from that period of the narrative. There's just something so nostalgic about the first chunk of chapters of Bleach, even for me who's still relatively new to the series. I just look back at this part of the story as being such simpler times before this massive tale was really fleshed out, and before Aizen especially flipped the whole script. So let me share my top 10 favorite moments from Bleach's Substitute arc. Just sit back and let's reminisce together about the good old days and the formative chapters of this wonderful manga. Number 10. Don Kanonji's introduction. I always enjoy the trope of the expert, professional, public hero that's actually nowhere near as heroic, professional, or competent as the rest of the world believes. It often opens up fun avenues to play with, whether it's their own feelings towards being almost a fraud, or the humor around their attempts to be something they're really not, or just the comparisons of their skills to the actual heroes who know what they're actually doing. Don Kanonji's introduction as a popular TV spiritualist plays to all of these kinds of angles, and even to a commentary toward ghost hunters on television doing their best to spook an audience and the cameras, rather than actually knowing anything about busting real ghosts. It felt like Kubo wanted to say something about that kind of entertainment. There's a little bit of social commentary there, and I appreciated that. And it's a lot of fun seeing Don Kanonji try to stop a hollow from being created using his supposed knowledge, only to make things way worse. Besides all of that, he instantly became iconic to me while reading, and a silly corner of the Bleach universe. Fraud or not, I think he's extremely entertaining, and that's what makes a good television personality. And maybe he will turn out to be more than he seems. I wouldn't put it past the series, to be honest, but if he does, I hope he still remains just as fun to read as he was here when he was first introduced. At number 9, I have Tatsuki protecting Orihime. Tatsuki's one of those characters that I've enjoyed from very early on, and even though she hasn't been shown as often as I'd maybe like for her to be, she's had some incredible moments, and my favorite part of the series with her early on is when she defiantly stands up to the hollow Numb Chandelier in a desperate bid to protect Orihime. Tatsuki, as far as we know, and definitely back then, doesn't have supernatural abilities. She just took some martial arts classes and uses them to great effect to try to fend off Chandelier's thralls. It's pretty awesome, but once she's overwhelmed, we get this incredible scene. She seems completely at the Hollow's mercy like most regular people would be, but in order to protect her best friend, she keeps resisting and keeps trying to fight anyway, even going so far as biting the Hollow's tentacle and getting hit by her seeds, resisting her control, and even willing to die once she proves she won't be manipulated. It's this act of defiance, this sacrifice for her friend, that helps Orihime to unlock her abilities for the first time, which itself is a great moment, but Tatsuki putting everything on the line has always stood out to me as such a great scene for her character. I really hope she ends up getting abilities of her own and becoming more of a mainstay in the cast. She's one of my favorites, and this scene is a big reason why. At number 8, I have the whole Shrieker fight. This is maybe a little too big to just be considered a moment, really, but this is my video, and there were so many great things about the confrontation with Shrieker, so we're just gonna smush it all together. He's probably the most intimidating Hollow we've seen at that point in the series, a dead psychopath still spreading his murderous tendencies in the afterlife. I love Rukia having to confront him in her mortal form back when she didn't have her abilities. I loved Chad getting involved early on for the first time. I loved how brutal the fight was once Ichigo got involved, because this was before we really knew the details about Ichigo's mother's death, but you got enough subtextually to really feel how much Shrieker's actions were upsetting him and justifying Ichigo's rage. And ripping out Shrieker's tongue was wild and so deserved, let alone the smart move to make against his particular abilities. It was just all around great, but really came to an extremely interesting conclusion. It ended in such a unique way, with Shrieker getting dragged into the gates of hell instead of having his soul purified. It was such a striking and memorable visual, but the crazy part is that at least so far where I'm at, we haven't touched on hell again. But one thing I do know is that there is a future movie for me to watch called Hellverse, so hopefully I'll see more of it then. It was one of the best Hollow battles in the series, so I kind of needed to wrap it all together. It was quite a moment to see, and one of the action highlights of this early portion of the series. At number 7, I have Rukia's bedroom. There's just something really fun and endearing about Rukia making camp in Ichigo's closet after she loses her abilities, and it's especially hilarious that he doesn't know she's even there at first. It's one of those things that is just a fun little angle in setting up the status quo, and one of the things I fondly look back on when I think about the early chapters. A teenage boy hiding a girl in his room is kind of classic, and the twist on it with who she is as his former Soul Reaper coach is just kind of perfect. I don't know, I've always really enjoyed that. It's just one of those things I remember when I look back. At number 6, I have Ichigo becomes a Soul Reaper from the very first chapter of Bleach. I mean, obviously this was the catalyst that launched this whole series, but it really was handled so well. Ichigo spent his whole life seeing ghosts, but this night was his first interaction with the Soul Reaper and his first interaction with a Hollow, and the pivotal moment of change toward what he would become, and Kubo handled it masterfully. The build-up of Ichigo trying to fight Fishbone D, despite just being a normal teen trying to protect his family. And then there was Rukia's injury that she sustained while protecting Ichigo, and her offer to have him, borrow some of her powers. The heartbeat sound effect happening in the background that's just increasing and amplifying the tension of the decision. The first time seeing a Hollow and just how dangerous they can be, and the satisfaction, the absolute satisfaction of that first transformation and that splat. Seeing Ichigo wield a Zanpakuto for the first time was incredible. It's just this hype moment. Combine that with all of the surprise that Rukia has when she sees it, which lets us as readers know that this isn't a normal kind of transfer of power. So it leaves you with questions at the end of seeing such an incredibly hype moment when Ichigo finally gets the power to really protect the people in his life. It was just so good, and it remains so good. Just classic, iconic, beautiful start to all of the action we've gotten since. At number 5, right in the middle, I have when the Menos Grande appeared. The appearance of the Menos Grande was a big one. Up until this point, the threat of the Hollows had seemed dangerous, but not like on an extremely massive scale that we saw. You had them messing up buildings and attacking unsuspecting victims, or little one-on-ones against Ichigo, but the threats didn't seem truly massive until the very first appearance of the Menos Grande. Here we have a Hollow unlike anything we've seen at this point, and it's absolutely gigantic, peeling its way through the sky, reaching into the living world. It's an incredible, terrifying image that makes me think of like H.P. Lovecraft cosmic eldritch terrors, just waiting on the other side of the veil of reality, unseen and bigger than we can fathom. It's so unlike any other Hollows that we saw at that point, and Kubo really sells this introduction with everyone watching's reactions to what's going on and just the sheer size of this. Despite having spent the chapters immediately preceding this fighting off more Hollows than we've ever seen before, those threats suddenly seem so insignificant compared to what's reaching into our world. Its eventual defeat, forcing it back into the tear that it came in from, was so satisfying and is another step in Ichigo's growth. But just the appearance of something like this opened up a whole new level for the size of Bleach's universe. I absolutely loved this introduction, and while the Gillians may seem a little less intimidating nowadays thanks to the growth of our characters, chapters, this is one of those moments in Bleach that I will never forget. Truly an iconic image to me, one of the best in the whole series. And even the next time we see something similar is almost just as effective, but nothing beats that first time when we suddenly seemed so small compared to what we were up against. Like, just imagine looking up and seeing that in the sky. Horrifying. Love it. At number 4, I have Ichigo is defeated. I think there's a very clear moment when Bleach evolved from what it was in this beginning stage into what it's become. A defining moment when the substitute arc comes to a real end. A loss of innocence, in a way. And that's when Ichigo is truly and utterly beaten in one shot by Byakuya, and Rukia is taken back to Soul Society. It may not technically be the end of the substitute arc. I can't remember if the training arc after this is all still part of it, or if it's its own mini arc, but whatever the case, to me, this marks the end of everything we've been talking about so far, as it steers away from the hollow hunting and more towards Soul Reaper fights, Zanpakuto lore, and Soul Society policies that defined the next arc. We had never seen something like this happen to Ichigo, not even during his toughest battles. This defeat was the wake-up call that Ichigo needed to hear that what he was doing wasn't enough for some of the real threats out there in the universe. It was one hell of a way to shift gears and change the series forever, establishing a new problem and new threats that had been naturally boiling up since the first chapter. It was a real pivotal point early on, and really changed everything. I go into it more in its own video, but still to this day, especially now looking back, you can see more clearly how this really was a turning point in the series. At number 3, I have Sora's sacrifice. The reveals that hollows weren't just monsters, but used to be people. At number 3, I have Sora's sacrifice. The reveals that hollows weren't just monsters, but used to be people driven to ravenous, murderous hunger in the afterlife was a major reveal and was perfectly conveyed by Orihime's late brother Sora coming after her after he had become a hollow. But the most beautiful part to me was how they managed to get through to the hollow, whose mind and soul had been warped by sadness and bitterness. How they managed to get Sora to pull off his own mask and stop his rampage when he remembered how much his sister loved him, realized that she hadn't forgotten him, and that dying isn't just hard for the people that leave, but also for the loved ones left behind. It's just a really beautiful way of showing the real sad truth about what hollows are at their core. And this is part of why I love hollows so much, this real tragedy at their center, the real sadness about their whole existence, and the fact they used to just be like you and me, but to turn into these monsters while starting off as just regular people. This showed that so beautifully, and Sora managing to break through his own mask and come back was a really powerful moment, and has always stuck with me as one of the highlights of these early chapters. At number 2, I have Kone's origin and appreciation of life. Despite having been used for some funny body hijacking hijinks throughout his introductory chapters, I've always loved the moment when Kone reveals the truly tragic part of Bleach so far. After having spent some time in Ichigo's body and being attacked by a hollow, he refuses to let a group of ants be collateral damage and die. He reveals that he refuses to let anything die, and it's because of what he's experienced so far in his existence, and it's just really sad. He's a mod soul, and the mod souls were ordered to be destroyed by the Soul Society. And the line that has stuck with me since reading this chapter 2 years ago at this point was how the day after he was born, he was chosen to die. And it's not like he wasn't conscious or anything at the time either. It sounds like he was self-aware and intelligent from the get-go, even inside his little pill, spending every day terrified that he would be destroyed next, since all the other mod souls like him were being systematically disposed of. He just got lucky that he ended up in a different storage unit. A fluke saved his life. A life that apparently wasn't considered to be a life by his creators. Blade Runner is one of my all-time favorite films, so knowing that, It's probably easy to see why this whole conversation would connect with me so much. I find the whole idea of what makes a living being, what is real consciousness, and what is a soul, all such fascinating concepts, and to see Bleach delve into all of that in such an unexpected way really hit me at the time, and it still does when I look back on it. Maybe even more in retrospect than even how powerful it was in the moment, because now we know Cone, and it's sometimes easy to forget that the mod soul inside of a stuffed animal comes from one of the darkest origins that I've read in the series at this point. And Cone respecting all life, no matter how seemingly insignificant, is powerful, as he believes every living thing has a right to exist, including himself. It's a really unexpected moment of tragic poignancy from a character who's mainly used as kind of cute comic relief, but it just highlights the complex shades of most of Kubo's characters. My number one pick probably won't surprise anyone that's followed my videos. You probably all knew that it would have to do with Memories in the Rain and June 17th, but it wouldn't have seemed fair to just lump that whole series of chapters together and call it my number one favorite moment. I know I kind of did that with the Shrieker fight, but I made a whole video about how Memories of the Rain impacted me as a whole, so I don't really just want to repeat the whole spiel. Like, go watch that video to see how much that turned me into a fan. So it would just be a little boring to just entirely repeat myself and gush about all of it again. No, if I had to pick a specific smaller moment from Memories in the Rain as my number one moment from the Substitute arc, then it would have to be Ichigo and Isshin speaking in front of Masaki's grave. I talked a bit about it before, but my feelings on it haven't changed. As someone that has stood in that position, grieving a lost mother with a father that is also still dealing with the loss, and finally connecting together for a moment, it hit hard, and it still does. It's the first time in the series that Isshin kind of drops the funny dad shenanigans and really speaks like a father doing his best to help his son. And his words of advice are probably my favorite lines of dialogue in the whole manga so far, and really resonate with me. This was the first glimpse that there's really something more to Isshin than his eccentric, goofy side. Something that much later on I'd learn goes far beyond what I ever suspected, but this right here was the first sign. In a series that started with massive swords, fighting hollows, and a whole lot of interesting supernatural shenanigans, it's a conversation between father and son that sticks out to me most in those early days, and was the small moment among an incredible series of chapters that really, I feel, should be highlighted. It's the simple everyday moments between human beings that sometimes resonates the most. So there we have it, my top 10 favorite moments in the early chapters of Bleach. And just remember, these are my opinions. Feel welcome to disagree. That's totally fine. Let me know what your favorite Substitute arc moments are, or what do you think of when you look back on Ichigo's first days as a Soul Reaper? I'd love to hear some of your guys' thoughts on those really early chapters. And as always, thanks so much for watching, guys. There will be a new First Time Reading Bleach chapter this weekend, so I'll see you then. Take care.